The night was unusually quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you notice your own heartbeat. I stood on my balcony, pretending to enjoy the breeze, but really just staring at the small house next door. His window light was still on. My neighbor, the one who had somehow become a part of my evenings without ever really trying. We used to exchange simple nods, a polite smile here and there, but lately our conversations had grown longer, warmer. It started with random talks about books, weather, life, and somehow it began to feel like I waited for those talks more than I should have. Why phone buzzed. It was a message from him. Can you come over for a bit? I made tea. I looked at the time. 10:48 p.m. I hesitated, staring at the message. My partner was away for work, and the apartment felt emptier than ever. Maybe I just wanted company. Maybe that's all it was. I grabbed a jacket and walked next door before I could think too much about it. He opened the door before I even knocked. The soft amber light behind him made the place look cozy, almost unreal. You came, he said with a small smile, that calm, unreadable smile he always had. Inside, the air smelled of rain and mint tea. There were two mugs on the table, a faint trace of music playing from his phone, and for a moment, I felt something shift, a comfort that didn't belong to me that we talked about nothing at first. The kind of conversation that hides everything beneath it. He told me about his day, his favorite songs, his thoughts on loneliness. I listened more closely than I should have. The rain started again, tapping gently on the windows, and in that sound, silence began to grow between our words. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was charged, almost like we both knew something was being said without being spoken. He looked at me and said, "You always look tired lately. Everything okay?" I tried to smile. "Just work. And life, I guess." He nodded, eyes still on me. "You don't have to pretend here," he said softly, and somehow that sentence hit deeper than it should have. For a moment, I wanted to tell him everything, how distant things had become at home, how I'd forgotten what it felt like to be seen. But I didn't. I just smiled again, weaker this time. He reached over to refill my cup, his hand brushing mine, a light accidental touch, but enough to send a rush through me. I looked away, heart beating faster, unsure of what that moment meant. The warmth of the tea didn't compare to the warmth that suddenly filled the room. He spoke again, voice low. "It's strange how quiet nights like this make you realize how lonely you are." I could hear my own breathing. "Yeah," I whispered, "I know." Minutes passed like hours. The conversation turned slower, softer, until all that was left were glances. His eyes didn't look away this time. There was a question there, unspoken but heavy. And in that moment, I realized how thin the line was between comfort and temptation. I thought about my partner, about the promises we had made, but I also thought about the emptiness I'd been carrying, and how right now, in this quiet house with rain outside, that emptiness felt like it had finally met its reflection. When I stood to leave, he didn't stop me. He just walked me to the door, close enough that I could feel his presence without him touching me. "Thanks for coming," he said. I nodded, my throat dry. "Thanks for the tea." I stepped out into the rain, the cold air hitting my skin like a reminder of where I was and where I shouldn't be. As I walked back home, every drop of rain felt like a confession I wasn't ready to make. Inside my own house, everything was still. The silence felt different now. Heavier, louder, almost alive. I caught my reflection in the window. My face looked the same, but something in my eyes wasn't. I didn't know what exactly had changed tonight, only that it had. And as I turned off the light, I glanced once more toward his house. The window was still glowing softly, as if it was waiting. And for the first time, I wished it wasn't. The following days moved slowly, each one feeling heavier than the last. I try not to look toward his house, but somehow my eyes always found their way there. Every night, the same warm light glowed through his window, a quiet reminder of something unfinished. I told myself it had been nothing, just tea, just conversation, but the memory of that night kept replaying in my mind, softer each time, but never fading. One evening, I saw him outside, standing by the small garden between our houses. He smiled when he saw me, a calm, knowing smile. "You've been hiding," he said lightly, brushing the leaves off his hands. I laughed nervously. "Just been busy." But we both knew that wasn't true. He didn't push. He never did. That was the problem. He didn't have to. His silence was persuasive enough. That night, I found myself walking again, aimlessly at first, but my steps somehow led me back to his porch. The door opened almost instantly, as if he had been expecting me. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. I shook my head. He stepped aside to let me in, the same music playing softly in the background. Everything felt the same as before, yet heavier. Like the air itself knew what we were about to deny. We sat on the couch, a single lamp casting gold light over the room. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't awkward. It was too intimate for that. I could hear the ticking of the clock, the sound of rain starting again, faint but steady. He looked at me, his voice barely above a whisper. "You don't have to explain. I understand." His words made my chest tighten. I wasn't sure if I wanted to be understood or saved for myself. I looked down at my hands, unsure what to do with them. "It's not supposed to be like this," I said quietly. "I'm not supposed to be here." He nodded. "And yet you are." There was no judgment in his tone, only truth. That was what scared me most. The honesty between us was sharper than anything else. I could feel it, this fragile thread pulling us closer. Every second that passed made it harder to resist. I wanted to move, to stand, to walk away, but I didn't. He leaned back, eyes on me, and said, "Do you ever wonder why people call it betrayal when sometimes it feels like the first real thing in a long time?" The question hung in the air. I swallowed hard. "Because it still hurts someone," I said, "even if it feels right in the moment." He smiled faintly. "You're kind, even in your guilt." Something in his voice broke me a little. I turned away, staring at the rain sliding down the window pane, catching the reflections of light. For a second, I imagined another life, one where I wasn't bound by promises, where love could exist without judgment. It was a dangerous thought, but it was there, and it felt like freedom and shame woven together. When I finally looked at him again, he was already watching me. Neither of us spoke. The distance between us felt smaller than ever. He reached out slowly, as if giving me time to step back. I didn't. His fingers brushed mine again, the same touch as before, but this time deliberate. My breath caught, and for a brief, suspended moment, everything stilled, the sound, the light, even thought itself. Then I pulled my hand back. The air shifted. The spell broke. "I should go," I said, my voice barely audible. He nodded once, eyes soft but unreadable. "You don't owe me anything," he said gently. That I stood, but I didn't move right away. My body wanted to stay. My heart wanted to leave. It was a strange kind of war, one no one ever really wins. Finally, I stepped toward the door. He followed quietly. "Good night," I whispered. "Good night," he said. But there was a sadness in his tone that echoed even after I left. Outside, the rain was colder now, sharp against my skin. I walked faster, my thoughts a blur of guilt and longing. When I reached my own door, I paused and looked back. His house looked smaller from a distance, dimmer, yet that faint glow in the window still reached me. I hated how it made my heart ache. That night, lying in bed, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, not the way he looked at me, but the way I looked back. I told myself nothing had happened, but in my heart, I knew better. Sometimes betrayal doesn't need touch. Sometimes it's just a glance that lingers too long, a feeling you let grow when you should have let it fade. And as the rain finally stopped, I realized the silence that followed wasn't peaceful anymore. It was the sound of a truth I didn't want to face. Morning came, but it didn't feel like morning. It felt like an afterthought, like the day had already begun without me. I stared at the ceiling, the same shadows moving across it as the sun rose. And for a moment, I wished I could erase everything that had happened. Nothing visible had changed. Not really. But something inside me had quietly collapsed. When my partner called later that day, their voice sounded distant, wrapped in routine. We talked about errands, meetings, the usual. I answered softly, pretending to listen, pretending everything was fine. But every word felt hollow, echoing against the silence of what I hadn't said. I kept wondering if they could hear the guilt in my voice, if they could sense the distance I'd built without meaning to. Days turned into a blur of small motions. Coffee, work, empty meals. I tried avoiding the window, but sometimes at night, When the lights dimmed and the world grew quiet again, I'd see his silhouette through the curtains next door. We didn't speak, not even through messages. It was as if the silence between us had grown too large to cross. But I still felt him there, like a presence that lingered even when unseen. One evening, I found myself standing at the window again, watching the rain fall. It reminded me of that first night. How simple it had seemed to accept a cup of tea. How innocent it all looked before emotions twisted it into something else. I realized then that I missed the version of myself who hadn't yet felt this kind of ache. The kind that stays even when you do nothing wrong, because sometimes not doing something still changes everything. The next morning, I saw him outside, watering the plants. He looked up briefly, and our eyes met. Neither of us smiled. The world felt quieter than usual, and in that silence, I understood that some stories never ask for endings. They just fade where words can't go. I wanted to walk over, to say something, maybe even apologize, though for what exactly I didn't know. But I stayed where I was. Maybe staying silent was the only honest thing left to do. That night, lying in bed again, I thought about what infidelity really meant. I used to think it was about actions, something you could point to, define, condemn. But now, it felt more like a shadow, something that begins long before touch, in the quiet places between words, in the moments where your heart chooses someone it shouldn't. I had crossed that line long before I realized it. I remembered the warmth of his living room, the way his eyes had held mine, the way I'd wanted to stay even as every part of me whispered to leave. It wasn't love, not exactly. It was connection, rare and dangerous, built on the spaces our lives had left empty. And maybe that's why it hurts so much, because it was never meant to last. As days went on, the distance between us grew real. The lights in his house started going out earlier. The music stopped drifting through the walls. Whatever had sparked between us had burned out quietly, leaving behind only a strange tenderness, the kind that hurts but doesn't wound. I caught myself wondering if he felt the same, if he too replayed that night sometimes and wondered what might have been. But I never asked. Weeks later, I saw him leaving one morning, suitcase in hand. He glanced at my house once before getting into the car. Our eyes met for a brief second, a silent acknowledgement of something that almost became, but didn't. And then he was gone. That night, his window stayed dark for the first time. I stood there for a while, staring at the emptiness, feeling both relieved and hollow. I realized that sometimes closure isn't a conversation or an apology. It's just a quiet absence that teaches you something about yourself. And I went back inside, made myself tea, and sat by the window. The same rain started again, soft and familiar. I took a sip and let it warm my hands. I thought about him, about my partner, about the strange ways love stretches and breaks and heals. And then I whispered to no one, "I'm sorry." Not because I'd done something unforgivable, but because I'd let my heart wander where it shouldn't have. I turned off the light. The reflection in the window stared back at me. The same face, but a little different now. Wiser, lonelier maybe, but honest at last. Outside, the rain kept falling, washing everything quietly clean.